"You're not dying tonight," he swore. Mafia boss held the burned Maid as the building collapsed. Valmont didn't just have a wrong side of the tracks, it was all wrong side. A spiderweb of cracked pavement and looming, soot-stained brick. The city was a closed fist, and people like Adriana Ruiz were just dirt trapped between the knuckles. At 24, Adriana was practiced in the art of evaporation. She was a ghost in a blue smock, scrubbing the sins from the marble floors and brass rails of the Gilded Cage, the most exclusive, dangerous nightclub in Valmont. It was owned by Dante Valachi, a man whose name was only ever whispered, usually followed by a quick sign of the cross. Adriana worked long shifts, her head down, her movements small and efficient, trying to remain invisible. She was undocumented, a whisper. A whisper could be erased with a breath. Every $10 bill she saved, damp with sweat and cleaning chemicals, was a prayer. Every 2 weeks, she wired the money south, a lifeline thrown across a continent to her mother and younger brother in Nicaragua. That was her only focus. Stay invisible. Send the money. Survive. The Gilded Cage was quiet on a Tuesday night, the calm before the weekend storm. Adriana was assigned the upper rooms, the exclusive VIP lounges reserved for Valachi and his inner circle. She pushed her rattling cart down the plush carpeted hallway, the scent of stale champagne and expensive cologne hanging in the air. She was supposed to be cleaning the Sapphire Lounge, but the door to the Onyx Lounge, Dante Valachi's personal office and sanctuary, was slightly ajar. She heard voices, not the usual drunken laughter, but the low, sharp cadence of an argument, steel scraping concrete. The shipment was light, a voice rumbled, one she recognized as Vico, Dante's chief lieutenant. 100 keys light. It's not our problem, a new voice answered, laced with a heavy, unfamiliar accent. Los Dragones delivered what was promised. Your man was short on the pickup. My man is dead. Vico's voice dropped, losing its heat and gaining a deadly chill. And the stolen money is missing with him. That's a problem. Salazar, a big one. A problem you created? You think we don't know you're moving on our territory? This is a warning. That's not a warning, Vico countered. That's a declaration of war. Dante won't... Adriana didn't wait to hear what Dante would or wouldn't do. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she was sure they could hear it. Stolen money. Shipment. Los Dragones. These were words from a world she spent her life trying to avoid. She was cleaning the wrong room at the wrong time. She began to back away, her rubber-soled shoes silent on the carpet. But the cart, the rattling wheels, she froze. The voices inside stopped. The door swung open. Adriana found herself staring at Vico. He was a mountain of a man in a tailored suit, his face a roadmap of old scars, his eyes dark and flat, scanned her. He didn't look at her with anger or even surprise. He looked at her like she was a smudge on the glass, an inconvenience to be wiped away. He saw her, and in that instant, her invisibility, her only shield, was gone. "Pardon," she whispered, her voice a thread. The lounge, I was..." Vico just stared. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just looked, committing her face to memory. Behind him, the other man, Salazar, peered out. "What is it?" "Nothing," Vico said, his eyes never leaving Adriana's. "Just the help. Get out." The last 2 words were not a suggestion. Adriana didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed her cart, the apology dying on her lips, and fled down the hallway, the clatter of her wheels echoing her panic. She didn't stop until she was back in the cavernous, bleach-scented utility closet in the basement. She hid there for 10 minutes, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't unbutton her smock. He had seen her, a maid, insignificant, surely. He would forget, surely. She was too small to matter. She finished her shift, her fear a cold knot in her stomach, and retreated to the small, windowless staff wing to wait for her bus. That night, the fire started not with a bang, but with a whisper. Adriana had been dozing on a cot in the break room, waiting out the last hour until her 4 a.m. bus. The first sign was the smell. It wasn't the usual nightclub smell of spilled beer and cigarettes. This was chemical, acrid, It stung her nose and made her eyes water. Then, a muffled thump from the main floor, followed by the first distant, terrified scream. The building's power cut, plunging the basement into absolute darkness. Adriana scrambled to her feet, her heart leaping into her throat. She fumbled for the door, pushed it open, and was met by a wall of thick, oily smoke. The hallway was a tunnel of choking gray. The fire alarms began to shriek, a useless, belated warning. Panic clawed at her. The main stairwell would be a death trap. She turned toward the staff exit, the one that led to the back alley. She ran, her lungs already burning. The fire didn't creep. It lunged. It roared up the stairwell from the main floor, devouring the expensive curtains and plush carpets. The gilded cage was turning into a furnace. When she reached the staff exit, her hope turned to ash. A wave of orange and black billowed toward her. The alley exit was blocked, already consumed by flames. Los Dragones hadn't just set a fire. They had sealed the tomb. They were silencing witnesses. They were sending their message. Adriana was trapped. The smoke was a living thing, a predator. It wrapped around her, filling her lungs with glass and soot. She dropped to her knees, coughing, her body desperate for one clean breath. The heat was immense, blistering her skin through her thin uniform. She crawled into a small alcove, curling into a ball, her mind screaming, "Mama, Hermano," she was going to die here. An invisible girl in a burning building, thousands of miles from home. Outside, the street was a scene of chaos. Sirens wailed, red and blue lights painting the faces of the stunned crowd. Dante Valachi stood beside his black armored sedan, watching his empire burn. He was immaculate in a black tuxedo, his face carved from stone, betraying nothing. Vico ran up, his phone pressed to his ear. "Boss, the fire department is here. We have to go. The perimeter is secure, but—" Dante didn't move. He was listening to the building, listening past the sirens and the roar of the flames. "Did you clear the staff wing?" His voice was low, a rumble that vibrated with cold authority. Vico paled. I told everyone to get out. The fire was too fast. Boss, it's a total loss. It's just a building." "You're wrong," Dante said. He had heard it, a faint, muffled sound, almost lost in the din. A woman's desperate, choked cry. He started walking toward the entrance. Vico grabbed his arm. "Dante, no, it's not worth it. It's an inferno. Let the firefighters handle it." Dante shrugged off the hand, his eyes fixed on the burning doorway. No one burns. He ripped off his tuxedo jacket, tossing it to the pavement, against the frantic shouts of his own men and the arriving fire crew. Dante Valachi walked back into the inferno. The heat was a physical blow, staggering. Smoke blinded him. He knew this building better than his own skin. He moved through the lobby, debris falling around him, and headed for the staff wing, guided by a force he hadn't felt in 10 years. He found her in the alcove. She was a small, dark-haired heap, a bundle of rags that was almost indistinguishable from the char. Her uniform was scorched, and one arm was raised, as if to ward off the inevitable. She was unconscious, barely breathing, and he didn't hesitate. He scooped her up. She weighed nothing. He cradled her against his chest, her head lolling against his shoulder, and turned. He was a bull, crashing through the smoke, his only thought to get her to air. He emerged from the club just as a section of the roof collapsed, sending a geyser of sparks into the night sky. The crowd, the paramedics, his own men, they all stared, stunned into silence. The feared mafia boss, Dante Valachi, covered in soot, his white shirt stained black, was carrying a burned, half-dead maid in his arms. Paramedics rushed forward with a stretcher. "Sir, we'll take her. She needs the burn unit now." One of them, a young man, reached for Adriana. Dante took a step back, his grip tightening. He looked at the girl in his arms, her face a pale oval against the soot, her breath a terrible, shallow rasp. He looked at the paramedic. "No," Dante said. The word cut through the chaos. "Sir, she's critical," the paramedic insisted, bewildered. She's another worker. We need to take her to Valmont General." Dante's eyes, cold and dark, locked onto the man. "She comes with me." He walked past the stretcher, past the flashing lights and the stunned firemen. "Vico," he commanded. "The car. Now." Vico, his face grim, wrenched open the back door of the Bentley. Dante gently, almost tenderly, laid Adriana across the soft leather seats. He got in after her, cradling her head in his lap as the car sped away, leaving the sirens and the burning club behind. Adriana drifted in a sea of pain. Consciousness was a distant shore she couldn't reach. There were flashes, red lights on a wet street, the smell of burning hair, the feeling of floating, then falling into the softest leather she had ever touched, a man's voice, like gravel and velvet, ordering the world to bend to his will. She dreamed. Strange. Vivid dreams haunted by heat, a man sitting by a bed. His face was in shadow, but his eyes were clear, dark and intense, watching her. He never spoke. He just watched. She woke. Days later, to the beep of a machine and the antiseptic smell of a hospital room. But this was no hospital. The room was vast, the ceilings high. The sheets were silk. Through a gap in the heavy curtains, the lights of Valmont glittered far, far below. She was in a penthouse. Dante sat in the chair by her bedside, just as he had in her dreams. He hadn't slept in 2 days. His private doctor had come and gone, leaving a regimen of antibiotics, painkillers, and sterile bandages. "She's stable," the doctor had said. "For now." The smoke inhalation was severe. The burns are 2nd and 3rd degree, mostly on her back and arms. "She's lucky. You saved her life." Dante didn't feel lucky. He felt haunted. He looked at the small, bandaged figure lost in his massive bed. He had found her wallet in the scorched remains of her uniform. Adriana Ruiz, 24. A work visa expired 6 months ago. A folded, worn-out photo of a woman and a teenage boy. She was a liability, a witness. Vico had confirmed it. She was the maid from the hallway. Los Dragones had set the fire to silence her. And anyone else who might have heard, he should have left her for the paramedics. He should have let her disappear into the system. Instead, he had brought her here, to the one place in the city no one could touch. He had made her his problem. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and looked at her. He saw her fragility, the delicate line of her jaw beneath the bandages. But he also saw bravery. She'd been trapped in hell, and she had fought. The smell of smoke still clung to him, a phantom scent that never left. It brought back the memory. 10 years ago, the lake house, the faulty wiring. He was only 20, and he'd tried to go back in for Lucia, his 17-year-old sister. The firefighters had held him back, their hands like vices on his arms. As he listened to her scream, he'd sworn it then, a vow carved in his own soul. He would never, ever stand outside and listen to someone burn again. Adriana Ruiz stirred, a small, pained sound escaping her lips. Dante watched her, the city's ruthless boss, the man who owned judges and killed rivals, trapped by the ghost of his sister and the broken body of a maid. He hadn't just saved her, he had stolen her. And now, he was responsible for the life he had refused to let go. The first sensation was a lie. It was coolness, a whisper of silk against her cheek. The second was the truth. It was a deep, seismic throb of pain that pulsed from her back and arms, radiating inward, a fire burning under her skin. Adriana's eyes snapped open. The room was vast and dark, lit only by the electric jewelry of Valmont's skyline, visible through a wall of glass that stretched 20 feet high. She was in a bed large enough to be a kingdom, the sheets so soft they felt wet. A slow, rhythmic beep came from a machine beside her. An IV line snaked into the back of her hand. Her body was a prison of bandages. Thick gauze wrapped her torso, her left arm from shoulder to wrist, and patched her right side. She was stitched, bound and aching. She was alive. This was not a hospital. Hospitals smelled of bleach and despair. This smelled of old money, leather, and something faintly floral. This was the penthouse, the place she had only heard of in whispers among the staff. Dante Valachi's inner sanctum, the man from the fire, the man who had carried her. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of painkillers. She was a witness. She had heard Vico. She had seen Salazar. In her world, men like Dante Valachi did not rescue maids. They silenced them. He hadn't saved her. He had merely postponed her death. He had brought her here to finish the job cleanly. Away from the sirens and the falling ash, she had to escape. With a groan that tore from her throat, Adriana fumbled with the IV, ripping the tape from her skin. She tried to sit up. The movement sent a bolt of white-hot agony through her back, and she collapsed against the pillows, a choked sob catching in her throat. She was too weak. The fire and the smoke had stolen her strength. "I wouldn't do that." The voice came from the shadows. It was the same one she'd heard in her dreams, the one that rumbled with gravel and velvet. Dante Valachi emerged from a leather armchair in the corner, stepping into the sliver of moonlight. He was in a simple black t-shirt and dark pants, his feet bare. He looked less like a mafia boss and more like a predator at rest. He held a glass in his hand, swirling the amber liquid inside. Adriana flinched, scrambling backward until her bandaged shoulders hit the headboard. She was cornered. "Please," she whispered, her voice a raw, smoky croak. "I saw nothing. I heard nothing. I don't know anything. I won't tell." Dante stopped 10 feet from the bed, a safe distance. He didn't mock her. He didn't threaten. He just watched her, his eyes dark and unreadable, the same intensity she remembered from her fever dreams. "You're safe here, Adriana." He said her name, and the sound of it in his mouth terrified her. "No one will hurt you. You will kill me," she stated, the tears she refused to shed burning her eyes. "Because of what I heard." He took a slow sip from his glass. "If I wanted you dead, you would have burned." The cold logic of it hit her, but it didn't compute. "Why? Why am I here?" she demanded, her voice gaining a thin, reedy strength. "What do you want from me?" "I don't want anything from you," he said, his voice flat. "I just want you to heal. You're here for protection." "Protection?" She let out a sharp, incredulous laugh that turned into a painful cough. "From who? You? Your men? The men who set the fire? You are all the same. You are the fire." He didn't deny it. He didn't defend himself. He simply set the glass down and walked to the door. "A doctor will be here in the morning to change your dressings. There is food in the kitchen when you are ready. The men at the door are for your safety. Do not try to run. You won't make it past the elevator." He left, the door clicking shut with a heavy, final sound, leaving her alone with her pain and her terror. The next few days were a blur of disorientation. The doctor, a quiet, older man with sad eyes, came and went. He prescribed painkillers, strong ones, but Adriana refused them. She'd take the pills for the infection, but not the ones that dulled her mind. She needed to be sharp. She needed to be ready. Pain was a familiar companion. It was the cost of being alive, and she would not let this man take her clarity from her. Dante respected her refusal. He didn't force her, but he watched. He came and went from the penthouse. Sometimes she would wake from a fitful, smoke-filled nightmare to find him sitting in that same chair, watching her as the sun came up. His face a mask of exhaustion and something else she couldn't name. He brought her trays of food, simple broths, then pasta, then steak, which she picked at. Her fear and suspicion a stronger appetite than hunger. She would not speak to him. She would not look at him. She resisted the strange, gentle authority he wielded. Kindness from a man like this was just a different kind of weapon. A hook hidden in a soft piece of bread. She assumed intimacy was the price. It always was, in some form. But he made no move. He respected her space. His body always yards away from her, yet his gaze was a physical weight, a constant, growing intensity that wrapped around her more tightly than her bandages. On the 4th day, she was strong enough to stand while he was gone. She explored her prison. It was the entire top floor of the Valachi Tower, a palace of glass and steel. But every door was locked. The elevator required a code. Even the windows, she suspected, were inches thick, built to withstand a rocket. She was standing in the cavernous living room, leaning on the back of a sofa. When she heard the elevator doors open, she froze, expecting Dante. It was Vico, his scarred face set in a grim line. He didn't see her. He was arguing with another man, one she didn't recognize, as they walked toward Dante's office. He's lost his mind. Franco, Vico was saying, his voice a low, angry buzz. Hiding her here, in his own bed. It's his call. Vico, he pulled her out. He pulled out a liability. Los Dragones knows a maid survived. They are tearing the city apart looking for her. And he is hiding her from everyone. His own family doesn't know. Enzo calls 3 times a day, and Dante sends him to voicemail. He's protecting a nobody while putting the entire family at risk. She's a target, and he's painted that target on his own front door. So what do? Franco asked. We do what he says. Vico growled, his frustration palpable. We protect the girl, but if Salazar finds her, he'll burn this whole building to the ground to get to her. They disappeared into the office, the door closing. Adriana sank onto the plush carpet, her legs giving way. It was true. She was a target. She was the reason for the fire. And this man, this killer, was hiding her. Not just from her enemies, but from his own. The fear she felt for him was suddenly complicated by a new, unwelcome emotion, confusion. He was protecting her. He was risking his own world for her. That night, the storm broke. The doctor had changed her bandages, and for the first time, she had asked for a mirror. He had advised against it. She insisted. He left her alone in the massive marble bathroom. She stood before the glass, her small, frail body swallowed by one of Dante's silk robes. Her face was pale, her hair still matted with soot he hadn't been able to wash out. But it was her arms, her back, that held her horror. The doctor had done his best, but the skin was a roadmap of ruin, where the fire had licked her. The skin was a violent, puckered red, shiny and tight, where it had kissed her. It was angry and blistered. She was a patchwork of damage. This was her body now, scarred, ruined. She thought of her mother, of the hope she had carried, she had wanted to send for her family, to build a life. What life could she build now? Who would want this? Who would hire this? She was damaged goods. She was worthless. The first sob was silent, a wrenching of her gut. The second was a thin, animal wail. She slid down the cold marble wall, curling into a ball on the floor, the robe falling open to reveal the geography of her new life. She wept for her old skin, for her old life, for the invisibility she had once cursed and now desperately missed. She didn't hear the bathroom door open. She only knew he was there when his shadow fell over her. "Leave me," she choked out, trying to cover herself, to hide her shame. Dante didn't leave. He knelt beside her, his movements slow, as if approaching a wounded animal. He was so large. His presence filled the entire room. He didn't speak. He just knelt, watching her break. I'm worthless," she whispered, the words torn from her. "Look at me. I'm ruined. You should have let me burn." The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Dante's face, usually so controlled, broke. A flicker of profound, agonizing pain passed through his eyes. He reached out, his large, calloused hand hovering. He didn't touch her burns. He gently, so gently, cupped the back of her head, his fingers threading into her dirty hair. His touch was warm. It was the first human contact she'd had in... She couldn't remember. "You're not dying," he said, his voice a low, rough vow. It wasn't a comfort, it was a command. "Not now. Not ever. Not on me." He scooped her up from the floor. She was so light, she didn't fight him. She had nothing left. He carried her from the cold bathroom and laid her on the bed. The silk robe was open, her bandaged, scarred body exposed in the moonlight. She tried to pull it closed, but her fingers were trembling. "Stop," he said, his voice soft. He sat on the edge of the bed, his gaze holding hers. He wasn't looking at her with pity or disgust. He was just looking. "The doctor left new dressings," she stammered, her shame warring with her exhaustion. I can't reach." He nodded, a sharp, single movement. He retrieved the sterile medical kit from the bedside table. He clicked on a small, warm lamp, and then he began. This was their first true, charged, physical scene. It was not sexual. It was something far deeper, something that lived in the soul. Dante's hands, which she knew could break men, were impossibly gentle. He unwrapped the old gauze, his movements economical and sure. She flinched when the air hit the raw skin, but he didn't stop. He worked with a reverence that stunned her, his breathing slow and measured, in sync with hers. He touched only the healed places, his fingertips brushing the healthy skin around the burns as he applied the salve and the new, clean bandages. He worked in silence. The only sounds were the rustle of the gauze and their matched breaths. She watched his face, the concentration in his dark brows, the way his jaw was set. He was tending to her as if she were something priceless, something he was meticulously putting back together. When he was finished, she was re-wrapped, secure. He didn't move away. He just looked at her, his hand still resting on her good shoulder, his thumb stroking the unblemished skin. Adriana didn't know who moved first. Perhaps she leaned into his warmth. Perhaps he pulled her closer. But suddenly, her head was on his chest. She was tucked against his side, his arm securely around her. She could feel the solid, steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, a counter-rhythm to the chaos of her own. He smelled of soap and the faint, lingering scent of his whiskey. She felt safe. It was the most terrifying feeling she had ever had. She fell asleep like that, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion. Her head on his chest, Dante Valachi did not move for hours. He sat, rigid, in the quiet of his penthouse, holding the burned Maid, the city glittering like a cold promise beneath them. He had protected her from the fire. He had protected her from the world. But as he held her, he realized he had no one to protect him from her. Miles away, in a dimly lit warehouse in the industrial district, Salazar Cortez slammed his phone down on a table. "She's alive," he snarled to the shadows. "The little rat from the hallway. She's alive. Find her. Find out who has her. And when you do, bring her to me. I want to be the one to finish the message." The penthouse was a glass tower, a glittering target. Vico had been right. The risk of keeping Adriana there, in the very heart of his empire, had become untenable. Los Dragones were not just looking, they were hunting. Dante moved her 2 weeks after the fire, in the silent, suffocating hours before dawn. There was no fanfare. He simply woke her, handed her a set of simple, clean clothes, and led her to a service elevator that descended into the building's private, subterranean garage. The new location was a fortress, not a palace, a high-end, pre-war apartment in the university district, a building of thick brick, solid oak doors, and old, quiet money. The family had owned the unit for decades, a secure bolt hole disguised as an academic's residence. It was heavily guarded. 2 of his most trusted men, Marco and Leo, were stationed in the hallway, 24 hours a day. 2 more were in the lobby, posing as over-caffeinated security. Adriana's world shrank from a skyline to 3 rooms, but in this smaller space, something unexpected happened. She began to breathe. Her burns were healing. The doctor still came, but less frequently. The thick, mummifying bandages were replaced by lighter dressings, then by simple salves. Her skin was a tapestry of new and old, of pale pinks and angry reds, but it was her skin. She could move. She could shower by herself, a luxury that felt like a resurrection. And Dante visited. He did not just visit. He anchored his day to her. He would arrive at dusk, his long coat smelling of the cold city air, and stay for hours. He was supposed to be running a war, managing a crumbling ceasefire, but he found himself driving across town every night, drawn by a gravity he could not explain. At first, they were quiet. They sat in the small, comfortable living room, the silence broken only by the city's distant, muted sirens. But the quiet began to fill. It started with coffee. He drank the sludge that his men brewed, a bitter, watery tar. She, born in the mountains of Nicaragua, could not stand it. "This," she announced one evening, holding up the mug he'd brought her, "is an insult to the bean." Dante raised an eyebrow. "It's coffee." "It's brown water," she retorted. Her voice, once a smoky whisper, now gaining a spark of its old fire. "In my village, we would throw this on the ground." The next day, he brought her a bag of whole beans from a specialty roaster downtown. They spent an hour arguing. She about the proper temperature. He about the fact that it was taking an hour. When it was done, she handed him a cup of the rich, dark, fragrant liquid. He took a sip. He had never tasted coffee before. "Not really, it's good," he admitted, the word feeling strange in his mouth. She smiled. It was the first time, not a grimace of pain or a twitch of fear, but a full, genuine smile that lit her eyes. The sight of it struck Dante harder than any bullet. He found himself wanting to make her do it again. They started playing cards. Gin rummy. He taught her, thinking it would pass the time. By the third night, she was beating him. "You're cheating," he growled, throwing his cards down as she laid out a perfect run. "I am learning," she said, her eyes dancing as she gathered the chips they were using as currency. "You are just a bad teacher." Her laughter returned. It was rusty, a hinge that hadn't been used, but it was real. His coldness, the armor he'd worn since his sister's death, began to melt. It wasn't a sudden thaw. It was a slow, painful cracking. They shared memories in the dark. She spoke of her brother, his obsession with American baseball, and the suffocating scent of the dust before the rainy season. She spoke of her mother's hands, strong and calloused, and the weight of being the one who had to leave. She asked about his past. He offered only shadows. "You never talk about yourself," she said, her head tilted, studying him from the other end of the sofa. "There is nothing to tell," he'd reply, his voice flat. "Everyone has something to tell, even men who hide in big buildings." She began to flirt. It was shy, a testing of the ice. She would stand a little closer when he handed her a glass of water. She would hold his gaze a second longer than was comfortable. She was testing his control, testing the boundaries of their strange, shared prison. Dante always turned away. He would clench his jaw, his hands tightening into fists, and find a reason to look at the window or check his phone, but his hands lingered. When he passed her the cards, his fingers would brush hers. He pulled back as if he'd been burned, the irony lost on no one. "What are you afraid of, Dante?" she asked him, her voice soft. "I'm not afraid of anything," he said, too quickly. "Yes, you are," she whispered. "You're afraid of this room. You're afraid of me." One evening, he arrived late. The war with Los Dragones was escalating, and he was tired, his bones aching with the tension. He'd left a bag of his own clothes at the safe house, clean shirts to change into. He unlocked the 3 deadbolts and stepped inside. The apartment was quiet. He found her in the living room, standing by the window, looking out at the rain-slicked street. She was wearing one of his shirts, a dark charcoal gray, expensive silk shirt. It was ridiculously, absurdly large. It swallowed her. The sleeves were rolled up a dozen times, and the hem brushed her mid-thigh. She had it on over a simple pair of cotton lounge pants, but the effect was profoundly intimate, domestic. She turned, a small, challenging smile on her face. "It's comfortable," she said. Dante froze. The air left his lungs. He had seen this woman at her most vulnerable, covered in soot and ash, broken on a marble floor. But this was more dangerous. This was the woman she was becoming. Whole, strong, and wearing his shirt. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He stopped just inches from her, his body thrumming with a tension that had nothing to do with the war outside. "You shouldn't have done that," he whispered, his voice rough. "Why?" Her voice didn't waver. Her eyes were locked on his. He cupped her face, his large, calloused hands gentle, his thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones. "Because I am not the man you think I am. I know exactly who you are," she replied. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a kiss of starvation, a kiss that had been held back for weeks. It was slow and thorough and desperate. He wasn't the boss. He wasn't a killer. He was just a man, drowning, and she was his only heir. He tasted the coffee on her lips and the strength in her. Her small hands came up, not to push him away, but to fist in his suit jacket, pulling him closer. She kissed him back, meeting his hunger with her own, a raw, undeniable need. Then, just as suddenly, he broke away. He stumbled back, breathing hard, as if he'd touched a flame. He ran a hand through his hair, his composure shattered. He looked angry. He looked at her as if she were a trap he had just walked into. "I can't," he bit out. Adriana's eyes flashed. The timid maid was gone. In her place was a woman who had walked through fire. "Why?" she demanded, her voice firm. "Because of this?" She gestured to her arm, where the new, pink skin of her scars was visible below the rolled-up silk. "Because I'm ruined?" "No," he growled, the word torn from him. He was angry at himself, at his own lack of control. "Then what?" she said, stepping toward him. "You act like I'll break if you love me." The words hit him like a physical blow. He staggered, slumping against the wall. "Love?" He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. I don't do that. I break things. Adriana, I own things. I use things. That is what I do." He looked at her, and for the first time, the mask of the mafia boss was gone. In its place was just a man, haunted and lost. "Everything I touch, I ruin," he confessed, the words raw and quiet. I've never had anything real to lose. Not since Lucia. Not for a long time. Until you. She closed the distance between them. She, the small, scarred woman, walked up to the most dangerous man in Valmont. She placed her healed, steady hand on his chest, right over his pounding heart. "I'm not broken," she whispered, her gaze unwavering. "And I'm not afraid of you." This time, she kissed him. It was soft. It was a promise. It was acceptance. His control shattered. He lifted her into his arms, his mouth never leaving hers, and carried her into the bedroom. Their second intimate scene was not like the first. The first had been about survival, about a primal, clinical care. This was about discovery. It was soft and slow and drawn out. He undressed her with a reverence that made her ache. He didn't just look at her scars. He saw them. He saw the story they told. He saw the strength it took to wear them. His hands, which had known only violence, were healing hands. His lips, which had given orders that ended lives, whispered her name. He kissed the healed skin of her shoulder. He kissed the pale, vulnerable skin of her inner arm, just above the gauze that still covered her worst burns. He kissed her collarbone, her throat, her lips. Her own hands, which had spent a lifetime scrubbing floors, were just as strong. They explored him, learning the hard planes of his back, the tension in his shoulders, the surprising softness of his hair. Her scars were visible in the dim lamplight, and so was her strength. It wasn't a taking, it was a giving. Two broken, lonely people, finding a way to be whole in the dark. The next morning, the world shattered. Adriana woke first. She was tangled in the sheets, warm and safe, her body humming with a contentment she had never known. Dante was asleep beside her, his arm slung possessively over her waist. For a moment, in the gray morning light, they were just a man and a woman. Then Dante woke. Not slowly, but all at once. His eyes snapped open. He was instantly, terribly alert. "What?" she whispered. He put a finger to his lips. He was listening. The check-in. He breathed. "Marco. He's 12 minutes late." He slid from the bed, a silent shadow. He pulled on his pants, his movements fluid. He grabbed his gun from the nightstand. "Stay here," he ordered. "Do not move." He walked to the front door, his bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. He looked through the peephole. He unlocked the deadbolts, one by one, the sound deafeningly loud. He eased the door open a crack. Adriana saw him go rigid. He opened the door wider. Marco, his guard, was slumped against the opposite wall, his head at an impossible angle. His throat had been cut from ear to ear. A message. The safe house was compromised. Dante slammed the door, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "We're leaving. Now, get dressed. Now, Adriana." The tenderness from the night was gone, replaced by the cold, brutal boss. He was already grabbing a duffel bag, shoving extra clips into his pockets. She fumbled into her clothes, her hands shaking. He grabbed her arm. "We don't use the elevator." "Stairs." He pulled her into the hallway, past Marco's body, and kicked open the door to the service stairs. They clattered down 5 flights of concrete, the sound of their footsteps frantic. They burst into the subterranean garage. He shoved her toward the black, bulletproof SUV. "Get in! Stay down!" He started the engine. It roared to life. He threw it into reverse, tires screaming. As the SUV spun toward the exit ramp, 2 black sedans, their lights off, moved from the shadows, boxing them in. The garage exploded with noise. It was not like in the movies. It was a deafening, visceral storm of sound, the thwack, thwack, thwack of high-caliber rounds impacting metal. The windows spiderwebbed, turning opaque, but they held. "Dante!" Adriana screamed. "I see them!" he roared. He slammed the accelerator, his jaw set. He wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to demolish. The SUV, a 2-ton beast, smashed into the lead sedan. Crumpling its front end, Dante reversed, then hit it again. He was clearing a path, a bullet, a lucky shot, found a weak point in the side panel. It was not a clean hole. Hot metal shrapnel, fragments of the door and the bullet, ripped through the cabin. Adriana cried out, a sharp, sudden intake of breath. Dante didn't stop. He floored it, smashing past the wrecked sedan and up the ramp, bursting onto the morning street into a hail of gunfire. They fishtailed on the wet pavement. He looked over. She was clutching her side, her face pale. Blood, dark and rich, was seeping between her fingers. It wasn't a mortal wound, but she was bleeding. She was hurt. She grabbed his arm, her knuckles white. Her voice was a terrified whisper. Not for herself, but for him. "Don't leave me." Dante glanced at her, at the blood, and his face became a mask of cold, absolute fury. He put his hand over hers, squeezing hard enough to bruise, a lifeline. "You're mine," he swore, his voice a low, lethal promise as he sped through the terrified city traffic. "I don't let go." The SUV's engine was a roaring, wounded animal. The city of Valmont was a blur of steel and glass, smeared by the morning rain and the spider-webbed cracks in the bulletproof windows. Dante drove with a focused, terrifying calm, one hand on the wheel, the other gripping his gun. Adriana was pressed against the passenger door. Her teeth gritted. She held a wad of napkins, the only thing in the console, against the bleeding gash in her side. It was not deep. The shrapnel had torn the flesh rather than pierced the organ, but it was bleeding. And it was his fault. She was bleeding because of him. "It's just a cut," she said, her voice thin, trying to convince herself. Dante's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. He didn't speak. He just drove. He took back alleys, ran 3 red lights, and used the SUV's 2-ton weight to push a taxi out of his way. He was a force of nature, a man consumed by a cold, white-hot fury. She had seen him angry. She'd seen him cold. This was different. This was the rage of a king who had found his kingdom under attack. He drove for nearly an hour, leaving the dense, vertical maze of the city behind. They moved into the hills on the outskirts of Valmont, where the mansions were old and the roads were bad. He turned onto a nearly invisible path, a break in a wall of overgrown ivy. The SUV clawed its way up a gravel track, branches scraping against the armored sides. At the top of the hill, a ghost of a building waited. It was a villa, or had been, perhaps 50 years ago, a grand Italianate design, now surrendering to nature. The plaster was crumbling, revealing the brick bones beneath. Ivy had swallowed an entire wing. The windows were dark, gaping holes, most of them boarded up or broken. This was one of his father's abandoned properties, a relic from a time before Dante, a place so far off the grid it didn't even exist on city maps. There was no electricity, no running water, no surveillance. Dante parked the SUV in a collapsed carriage house, covering it with a dusty, rotting canvas tarp. He killed the engine. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rain drumming on the roof and Adriana's ragged breathing. "Here," he said, finally speaking. He got out and pulled a heavy-duty medical kit from a hidden compartment in the trunk. He came to her door, opened it, and simply held out his hands. She didn't have the strength to argue. She let him lift her. He carried her through the rain and into the dark, damp shell of the villa. He set her down on a dusty couch, the ancient fabric groaning in protest. He cut away the blood-soaked fabric of her shirt and pants with a grim efficiency. "This will sting," he said, his voice flat. He poured antiseptic over the wound, Adriana hissed, her back arching, but she did not scream. He worked quickly. His hands, the same hands that had been so tender the night before, now becoming the clinical, detached hands of a soldier. He stitched the gash with a steady, practiced hand. His movements economical, his jaw set. When he was done, he taped a thick gauze pad over the stitches. "You've done that before," she whispered, her voice trembling from the shock. "Too many times," he said. He stood, his shoulders high and tight. "I have to secure the perimeter." He left her, a gun in his hand, and melted into the shadows of the ruined house. They lived like fugitives. They lived like ghosts. The villa was their tomb and their sanctuary. Dante was furious at the betrayal. A mole, it had to be. Only 3 people knew about the safe house: Vico, Franco, and him. The breach was from within, and that, more than the attack itself, was what consumed him. But here, in the cold and the damp, he was cut off. No phone, no radio. To make contact was to risk exposure. So they waited. They slept on dusty couches, pushed together in front of the massive, soot-blackened fireplace in the grand salon. It was the only room that was relatively intact. Dante had found an axe and chopped wood from a fallen oak in the garden. The fire was their only light, their only warmth. They cooked canned food. Dante had provisioned the SUV for an apocalypse, and it was filled with water, medical supplies, and cases of MREs and canned goods. They ate cold chili and lukewarm beans, sharing a single spoon. But in this desolation, they became closer than they had ever been in the silk-sheeted penthouse. There were no more guards, no more doctors, no more outside world. There was only the rain, the fire, and the man who had admitted he had something to lose. Adriana's side healed, her scars, the old ones from the fire, seemed to fade in the flickering light, overshadowed by the new strength in her eyes. She was no longer afraid of him. She realized, afraid for him. She watched him. He would sit for hours, staring into the flames, his gun on his lap, his mind 1,000 miles away, plotting, hunting the traitor. He was coiled, a spring wound so tight she was afraid he would snap. "Who was she?" Adriana asked one night. The rain had stopped, and the villa was unnervingly quiet. Dante's head snapped up. "Who?" "The girl," she said, her voice soft. "The one you lost in the fire, the one you told me about." "Lucia," he said. The name was a piece of glass in his throat. "My sister." He had never spoken of this. Not to Vico, not to his father, but he told her. He told her about the lake house, about the smell of the pine trees. He told her about his 17-year-old sister, her loud, annoying laugh, the way she'd stolen his car. He told her about the faulty wiring, the smell of smoke, and the screams he still heard in his sleep. I was held back," he whispered, his voice cracking, the boss disappearing, leaving only the brother. "I tried to go in. They wouldn't let me. I stood there, and I listened." Adriana moved from her couch to his. She sat beside him, her small, stitched body next to his large, tense one. She didn't touch him. She just sat with him in the dark. "This is what you do, isn't it?" she asked, her gaze on the fire. "What?" "This, the guns, the men, the family." She said the word like a curse. "It's because you couldn't save her, so now you have to save everyone, or you burn everything down. There is no in-between for you, is there?" He looked at her, his eyes black pits in the firelight. He had admitted his weakness. Now she was asking about his sins. "You should run from me, Adriana," he said, his voice flat. "As soon as this is over, I'll get you a new life. Anywhere you want to go. You shouldn't be here." "But I am here," she said, her voice strong. Tell me what you do. Tell me what you've done. I'm not a child, Dante. I'm not the girl you pulled from the fire. I'm the woman who is sitting right next to you." He turned to her, his face a mask of self-loathing. "You want to know? You want to know what I am? I've hurt people. I've broken them for money, for power, for nothing at all. I have ordered men to be erased. I have taken things that were not mine. I have built an empire on the fear and the greed of this city. I am the reason men like Salazar exist. We are just two sides of the same filthy coin. I am everything you should hate." He confessed. He admitted to the brutal, ugly things he had sworn he would never involve a woman like her in. He laid his sins at her feet, expecting her to flee. Adriana listened. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. When he was finished, the silence in the room was heavier than the darkness. She looked at him, at this broken, violent, powerful man. She saw the killer, but she also saw the man who had sat by her bedside, the man who had gently rebandaged her wounds, the man who had confessed his greatest failure. This was their third romantic encounter. It was not soft, it was raw, and it was desperate. Adriana moved, not away, but closer. She climbed onto his lap, straddling his legs, her knees on the dusty cushion. She was so small, but her presence was a wildfire. Her scars were visible in the firelight, the new, puckered skin a map of her survival. Dante went rigid. "Adriana, don't..." She placed her hands on his cheeks, forcing him to look at her. "You are not a monster. Dante, you are just a man, and you are my man." She leaned in, her forehead resting against his. "Love me," she whispered, her voice thick with a desperate, claiming emotion. "Love me like I matter, not like something you saved, not like something you own. Love me like I am the only thing that matters." He obeyed. His hands came up to grip her waist, his touch tender, almost reverent. He kissed her, and it was not the kiss of a boss or a killer. It was the kiss of a man who had been given absolution. He poured all of his pain, his guilt, and his desperate, clawing need for her into that kiss. It was not about healing. It was about claiming. She was claiming him from his past. He was claiming her from the fire. His hands were gentle on her scars, his lips fierce on her mouth. He laid her down on the dusty cushions, in front of the dying fire, and vowed in actions, not words, that no one would ever hurt her again. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, the silence of the villa was, for the first time, peaceful. The peace lasted for 2 hours. The betrayal, when it came, was silent. A single text, sent from a burner phone miles away by a man Dante had trusted with his life, a single set of coordinates, leaked to Los Dragones. Dante was asleep, the first real sleep he'd had in weeks, his arm heavy over Adriana's waist. She was awake, watching the embers of the fire, her heart finally, terribly, full. The first sound was the crunch of gravel, a car, too quiet to be an engine. Someone was walking. Adriana tensed. "Dante," she whispered. He was awake, instantly. He rolled off the couch, grabbing his gun, his body a naked, lethal shadow in the dark. "How many?" he breathed. "I only heard one," she whispered back. Then, the whisper of movement from the back of the house, from the ruined garden. They were not alone. "They're here," he stated. It was not a question. "Get behind me. Now." He shoved her behind the massive, overturned sofa. He pressed his spare pistol into her hand. "You know how this works. You point, you pull. You do not stop pulling until it is empty. Only if they get past me. Do you understand?" She nodded, her hands shaking, her heart hammering. The night exploded. The Grand Salon's few remaining windows shattered inward. 3 men, dressed in black, tactical gear, poured in. They were not street thugs. They were professional. Dante was ready. He fired twice. 2 precise, economical shots. 1 man dropped, clutching his chest. Gunfire erupted. The sound in the enclosed space was deafening, a physical, concussive force. Plaster exploded from the walls. The air was thick with cordite and dust. "Dante!" Adriana screamed. "Stay down!" he roared. A second man rounded the fireplace. Adriana saw him, saw the gun leveled at Dante's exposed back. She didn't think. She raised the pistol, just as Dante had told her, and pulled the trigger. She pulled it again, and again. The gun barked, jumping in her hand, but her aim, fueled by pure terror, was true. The man staggered, surprised, and fell. Dante used the distraction. He lunged, grabbing the third man, using him as a shield as more gunfire poured in from the hallway. Suddenly, a hand grabbed Adriana's hair. A fourth man. He had come from the kitchens. He yanked her up, his arm clamping around her throat, a knife blade pressing against her cheek. "Valachi!" the man yelled. Drop it, or she dies." Adriana was frozen. She could smell the sweat and the metal. She was going to die. Dante saw her. He saw the knife. He saw her terrified eyes. His face, which had been a mask of cold fury, became something else. It became empty. "Let her go," Dante said, his voice a low, lethal whisper. "Drop the gun." Dante slowly, very slowly lowered his weapon, letting it clatter to the dusty floor. He raised his hands. The man holding Adriana laughed. "Bad move, boss. Salazar says hello." He started to drag her back, toward the kitchens. In that split second, Dante moved. He was not a man. It was a blur. He kicked the gun on the floor. It spun, striking the leg of the man Dante had used as a shield, who was now bleeding out. It was the distraction he needed. He dove, not for his gun, but for the fireplace. He grabbed the heavy, cast-iron poker. The man holding Adriana turned, surprised by the move. It was all Dante needed. He crossed the room in 2 bounds. He didn't just strike. He plunged the heavy iron poker into the man's chest. There was a wet, sickening sound. The man's eyes went wide. His grip on Adriana loosened. He gurgled and fell. It was over. Silence. Adriana was on her knees, gasping, her hand at her throat. Dante stood over the body, breathing like a winded bull. Then he swayed. "Dante?" He looked down. A dark, spreading stain was blooming on his shoulder. "He got me." He had been shot, in the chaos, in the adrenaline. He hadn't even felt it. He stumbled, and for the first time, the indestructible Dante Valachi fell to his knees. "No!" Adriana whispered. The shock gave way to a new, fierce resolve. She grabbed the medical kit. You can't die on me now." She tore open his shirt. The bullet had gone through. A clean, ragged hole. It was bleeding. A lot. "Hold this," she commanded, shoving a wad of gauze into his hand and pressing it to the wound. Hard. She grabbed the suture needle he had used on her. She sterilized it with the last of their bottled water and the flame from his lighter. He was watching her, his eyes hazy with pain, but with a strange, fierce pride. "This is going to hurt," she said, her voice shaking, tears streaming down her face, but her hands were steady. "Get it done," he gritted out. She stitched him up. It was clumsy. It was ugly. She cried the entire time, her tears falling on his bloody skin, but she did it. She saved him. When she was finished, they were both covered in his blood. The villa was a tomb, littered with 4 dead bodies. Dante pushed himself to his feet, his arm in a crude sling she had made from a curtain. He was pale, but his eyes were clear. "They'll send more," he said. "Where do we go?" she asked, her body numb. We can't keep running." Dante walked to the body of the man who had held her. He looked at the corpse. Then he looked at her. "No," he said, his voice like iron. "We don't run." He picked up his gun, checked the clip, and slammed it home. He walked to the door. "We're going to end this," he said. "We're not running. We're hunting." He held out his free hand. She took it. They walked out of the ruined villa, leaving the dead behind, and stepped into the pre-dawn light, headed straight for the enemy. The armored SUV was a tomb on wheels, reeking of blood and cordite. Dante drove with a white-knuckled grip, his wounded left arm bound tight to his chest by Adriana's crude sling. The sun was a smear of dirty yellow on the horizon, promising a day they might not live to see. They had escaped, but they were not free. They were a loose thread, and Dante knew Salazar would not stop pulling until their entire world unraveled. He didn't drive back into the city. He drove to the industrial docks, to a nondescript warehouse that smelled of rust in the nearby ocean. He killed the engine, and in the sudden silence, he turned to her. Adriana was pale, her knuckles white, her hands still sticky with his blood. But her eyes were not the eyes of the terrified maid he had pulled from the fire. They were the eyes of a soldier, hard, clear, and focused. "It's over," Dante said. His voice a low, rough rasp. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a deep, throbbing ache in his shoulder. "The running, it's done." "What do we do?" she asked. "I end it." "I'm going to kill Salazar Cortez, but I have to find the mole first. I have to find out who sold us." He paused, the next words costing him. "And you have to leave." He reached under his seat and pulled out a small, heavy duffel bag. He unzipped it and dumped the contents onto her lap. It was a life, a new one. A clean American passport with a face that looked vaguely like hers, a driver's license from a state she'd never heard of, and stacks of cash, hundreds held together by rubber bands, at least $50,000. "There's a car, a clean one, 2 blocks from here," he said, his voice flat, his gaze fixed on the steering wheel. "The keys are in the bag. It has a full tank of gas. You drive north. You don't stop. You don't call anyone. You don't look back. You become this person. You live." Adriana looked at the passport. The name was Jane. Something. She didn't care. She looked at the money. It was more than she had ever dreamed of, enough to bring her family to America, to buy a house, to be safe. It was everything she had ever wanted. She pushed the bag off her lap, the bundles of money thudding softly on the floor mat. "No," she said. Dante's head snapped toward her. "What? Adriana, this is not a discussion. I'm giving you a chance. Take it. You're free." "You think this is freedom?" she asked, her voice quiet but vibrating with a new, unshakable strength. She gestured to the passport, to the blood on her clothes, to his wounded arm. "Running? Hiding, being Jane from nowhere. I've been running my whole life. Dante, I've been invisible. I've been a ghost. I'm done running. Salazar will find you," he growled. "He will hunt you to the ends of the earth." "Then let him," she said, her dark eyes locking on his. "I am not leaving you. You don't get to decide this. You don't get to save me and then throw me away." "I'm not throwing you away," he roared, his fury a shield for his fear. "I'm trying to keep you alive. If you stay, you will die. Do you understand me? This world? It's not for you." "It is my world now," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She reached out, her small, steady hand touching his face, her thumb brushing his cheek. "You made it my world. The moment you walked into that fire, the moment you stitched my side, the moment I stitched yours." She leaned in, her forehead resting against his. "If you die," she whispered, her voice breaking but her resolve holding firm, "and I run, I'll burn anyway. I'll just be a different kind of ash." Dante looked into her eyes and saw his own soul reflected back. He saw the fire, the fear, and the unbending, terrifying strength. He had wanted to protect her from his world, but she was the only thing in his world that made sense. He had lost. He had won. He kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of acceptance. A sealing of a vow. It tasted of salt and blood and finality. "All right," he breathed against her lips. "We don't run. We fight, but we do it my way." He started the car. This time, he drove back into the heart of his city. He didn't take her to a penthouse or a safe house. He took her to the one place he had been avoiding. He took her home. The Valachi family compound was an old-world fortress, a block of brick and wrought iron in the center of Valmont's Little Italy. It was a restaurant on the ground floor, his father's domain, and a labyrinth of apartments, offices, and secrets above. Dante walked her through the front door of the restaurant. It was mid-morning. The place was empty, save for a few old men drinking espresso at the bar and his most trusted inner circle. Vico and Franco, sitting at a back table, when they saw Dante, his arm in a bloody sling, and Adriana, alive, pale, and defiant at his side. The room went silent. Vico's face was a mask of shock, then relief, then fury. "Boss, you're alive. We thought—" "The safe house." "The safe house was a trap," Dante said, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet. He walked, pulling Adriana with him, until he was standing over their table. "And one of you One of you said it. Franco, a younger, sharper man, paled. Vico just looked tired. Dante, it wasn't us. It was a comms leak. Salazar's he's got a mole. Dante cut him off. And I will find him. But first, he turned, his hand possessively on the small of Adriana's back. This is Adriana. She's not a liability. She's not a target. She is mine. She's under my protection. She is to be treated as you would treat me. He looked at Vico. She stays with me. She goes where I go. She's to be given anything she needs. Understood. Vico stared at Adriana. The last time he'd seen her, she was a terrified maid in a hallway. Now, covered in dried blood, she was standing at his boss's side, looking like she belonged there. He nodded, a slow, dawning respect in his eyes. Understood, boss. Franco stood. Signorina, he said, pulling out a chair. Adriana looked at Dante, who gave her a slight nod. She sat. The inner circle of the Valachi crime family was now 3 men and a maid, and they treated her like a queen. In the days that followed, the compound became a war room. Dante, his arm healing, his mind a steel trap, began to hunt. He and his men worked around the clock, mapping out Salazar's movements, identifying his assets, and, most importantly, finding the mole, Adriana, who could have been a pampered prisoner. Refused. She was a woman used to work, used to being useful. She couldn't shoot a gun. Not really. She couldn't fight. But she could see. She used her maid's instincts. She was a creature of observation, trained to be invisible. And in this, she found her power. She brought the men coffee, not as a servant, but as a colleague. She listened. She watched. She saw the way one of the younger guards, Rico, never looked Dante in the eye. She saw the way he obsessively cleaned his phone. She helped. While Dante and his men strategized, she sat at the kitchen table, her hands busy. She cleaned their weapons. Her small, nimble fingers were perfect for it. She broke down the pistols, oiled the mechanisms, and reassembled them with a focused, meticulous care that impressed even Vico. She memorized routes, looking at the maps splayed on the table, seeing the escape paths a maid would see. This alley is a dead end, she'd say, her voice quiet, pointing. The garbage trucks block it every Tuesday and Thursday. This one, she'd point to another, is cleaner, faster. When men came back from skirmishes, wounded and bleeding, she was the one who patched them up. She had stitched a boss. She was not afraid of his soldiers. She was calm and gentle, and her presence became a strange, quiet comfort in the chaos. Dante watched, his heart tight with a possessive, painful pride. She was not just surviving his world, she was becoming a part of it. One evening, Dante was in the old, wood-paneled office his grandfather had built, staring at a map of the city. His father, Enzo Valachi, walked in. Enzo was a lion in winter, a man of old-world traditions and cold, hard pragmatism. He had been silent on the matter of Adriana. She's a problem, Enzo said, not as a greeting. He lit a thick cigar, the smoke filling the room. She's with me, Dante said, not looking up from the map. She's a distraction. You're thinking with your blood, not your head. You've been shot. My best men are dead. The safe house is gone. All for a girl, a novia. She's not a girlfriend, father, and she's not the reason for this. Salazar is a rabid dog. You kick a rabid dog, you don't invite it into your house. Enzo stepped closer, his voice dropping. Love makes you weak. Dante, it makes you hesitate. It makes you stupid. Dante finally looked up. His eyes were cold, the same eyes his father had, but with a new, burning fire behind them. You're wrong, he said, his voice quiet. She makes me want to survive. Enzo stared at his son, seeing him for the first time in years. He saw the change. He saw the strength. He took a long, slow puff of his cigar, and for the first time, he nodded. Then survive, he said, and left the room. The mole was Rico, the young guard. Adriana had been right. He had a sister, a gambling problem. Los Dragones had him in a vice. Dante dealt with him. It was quiet. It was final. And from the information pulled from Rico's phone, Dante finally had his plan. The final showdown. Salazar wants a negotiation, Dante announced to his inner circle, Vico, Franco, and now, Adriana. He thinks I'm wounded, scared. He thinks the mole is still active. He's agreed to a meeting. It's a trap, boss, Vico said immediately. Of course it's a trap, Dante said, a cold smile touching his lips. He wants to end this. So do I. He's chosen the location, the old construction site, the Titan Tower. The Titan Tower was a monument to greed, an abandoned skyscraper, 30 stories of raw concrete and steel, left to rot when the money ran out. It was a perfect neutral ground kill box. You're not going alone, Vico said. I am, Dante replied. That's the deal. Me and him, one-on-one. That's suicide, Franco protested. It's a trap, Dante repeated, which is why he'll bring his whole army, and so will we. The plan was set. Dante would go in, wired for sound. Vico and his men would be in the floors above and below, waiting to spring the counter-ambush. The night of the meeting. Dante was checking his weapon, his good arm moving with practiced ease. Adriana stood in the doorway, watching him. He had already said goodbye. He had ordered her to stay in the compound, under heavy guard. I'm coming with you, she said. Dante didn't even look up. No. You need a driver, she said, stepping into the room. You need a medic. You need someone to watch your back who isn't holding a gun. You need me. Adriana, I am not having this argument. You will be safe here. Safe? She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. You think I will be safe, waiting here, listening to the static, wondering if you are bleeding out on a concrete floor? You think I'll be safe if Salazar wins? He will come for me, Dante. You know he will. You're the only one who can protect me. So don't leave me unprotected. She was begging him. Her eyes were wide, desperate, but her chin was high. She was not the maid. She was not the victim. She was his partner. He looked at her, at the fire in her, and he knew two things. He could not leave her unprotected, and he could not go into this fight without her. He nodded, a sharp, reluctant movement. In the car, on the comms, you do not leave the car. You do not move. If it goes wrong, you drive. You drive, and you do not look back. That is the deal. That is the deal. She lied. The Titan Tower was a skeleton against the bruised purple sky. Dante's SUV pulled into the vast, cavernous underground garage. He got out, his black suit making him a shadow. He looked back at her. Adriana, in the driver's seat, her hand on the comms unit, gave him a nod. Dante walked into the building. He was wired. She could hear his footsteps, his steady breathing. I'm in the lobby. Vico. Any sign? Nothing. Vico's voice crackled in her ear. The upper floors are clear. We're in position. Dante walked to the center of the vast, unfinished lobby, a 3-story atrium of steel rebar and plastic sheeting. Salazar, he yelled, his voice echoing. I'm here. Let's finish this. Silence. Then a new sound. A click. A metallic, final click. It came not from the floors above, but from the concrete pillars all around the lobby. Dante saw it at the same time Adriana did, on the small, grainy laptop feed from the car, the blinking red lights. C4. It's a trap. Dante's voice was low, urgent. Vico, get out. The lobby is rigged. He's not here. He's here. Salazar's voice boomed over a loudspeaker. He's everywhere. Did you think it was that simple? Valachi? Did you think I'd let you walk in here? This was never for you. It was for both of you. The mole, Rico. He hadn't just given up Dante. He had given up the plan. Salazar knew Vico was here. He knew about the counter-ambush. Adriana looked at the laptop feed. Men, dozens of them, pouring in from the stairwells. Salazar's men. They were storming the building, trapping Vico's teams on the upper floors. Dante! She screamed into the mic. They're coming! They're everywhere! Gunfire erupted, a deafening roar from the floors above. The war had begun. Dante, get out! Adriana unbuckled her seatbelt. Stay in the car! Adriana, that's an order, he roared back. Then, the first explosion. It was not in the lobby. It was on the lower floors, where Salazar's men were. But the force of it was monstrous. The entire building shook, groaning like a dying beast. Dante was thrown from his feet. The car's windows shattered. Adriana was screaming. She got out, her eyes on the lobby. Flames, oily, thick smoke. Flames were erupting on the lower floors, roaring up the elevator shafts. The building was on fire. Dante was on his hands and knees, dazed. Adriana ran toward him. "Adriana, no, go back!" She didn't listen. She ran into the inferno. She grabbed his arm, pulling him up. "Come on!" The building shook again, a massive, grinding tremor. A section of the ceiling, a concrete and rebar slab, tore loose. It fell, a house-sized block, aimed right at her. "Adriana!" Dante lunged. He shoved her, his body covering hers, taking the brunt of the impact as the world collapsed around them. He shielded her with his own back as debris rained down. She was pinned beneath him, the sound of falling concrete deafening. The heat was immense. She screamed as a piece of burning hot rebar, falling from the debris, landed on her arm, searing her skin. She screamed. It was a sound of agony. Dante, his head ringing, his body bruised, looked down. He saw the new burn on her arm, blistering, red and raw. He saw the terror in her eyes. He saw the fire. It was the lake house. It was Lucia. It was the nightclub. It was all happening again. He pushed the debris off them, his wounded arm screaming in protest. He looked at her, his face a mask of soot and blood and a fury that transcended sanity. "You're not dying tonight," he swore, his voice a raw, primal scream that echoed over the gunfire and the roar of the collapsing, burning building. The building screamed. It was not a human sound, but the shriek of 1,000 tons of steel and concrete tearing itself apart. The floor, which had been a solid, unfinished slab, now tilted, a new, dizzying precipice in a world made of smoke and fire. Adriana was sobbing, a high, thin sound of terror and agony. Her newly burned arm clutched to her chest. She was pinned beneath Dante. The heat, a physical, suffocating blanket, Dante's vow. "You're not dying tonight," was not a promise. It was a declaration of war against physics, against fire, against the entire collapsing world. He shoved the last piece of rebar off his back and rose, a golem of soot and fury. He was limping. A piece of shrapnel from the explosion had torn through his thigh, a new wound to match the one in his shoulder. He was bleeding from a dozen smaller cuts, but he was moving. He reached down, his hands finding her. He didn't ask if she could walk. He knew she couldn't. He lifted Adriana into his arms, her small, trembling body a stark contrast to the chaos. She weighed nothing. She was a bird. She was a ghost. She was his. "I have you," he growled, his voice a raw rasp. She buried her face in his neck, her sobs muffled against his bloody suit. "It hurts, Dante. It's the fire." "I know," he said, his voice tight. "We're moving." He turned, his back to the inferno, and headed for the emergency stairwell, the only possible way out. The building shook again, a violent, bone-jarring tremor. The fire roared up the elevator shaft behind them, a dragon chasing them from its lair. Debris, not just dust, but fist-sized chunks of concrete, rained down, pinging off the steel girders. Dante shielded her with his body, his wounded shoulder taking the brunt of the falling wreckage. He was limping badly, each step a symphony of pain, but he never wavered, he never loosened his grip. He was a man walking through hell, carrying the only thing that mattered. He kicked the stairwell door. It was warped from the heat, but the lock gave. They were plunged into a new kind of darkness, thick with acrid smoke. The lights were gone, the air a toxic, choking soup. "Breathe through my jacket," he commanded. He descended, one step, then another. He was a machine, fueled by a single primal purpose: get her out. The building groaned around them, a chorus of tearing metal and splitting concrete. Explosions, smaller but just as deadly, roared from the floors below. The ones Salazar had rigged, the concussion's Viber workstations, shaking the very stairs beneath his feet. Adriana, half-conscious, drifted in a sea of pain. She was burning, her new wound, her old scars. All of it was on fire, but the arms around her were steady. The heartbeat she was pressed against, though rapid and strained, was the most solid thing in the universe. They descended 10 flights, 20. Each landing was a new obstacle. Fire licked up from a ventilation shaft. He turned, using his own back as a shield against the heat, and pushed through. The smoke was so thick he was moving blind, guided only by the memory of the building's layout and the desperate, unshakable need to find clean air. He was stumbling. His leg was giving out. The blood loss from his shoulder and thigh was catastrophic. He could feel himself getting lighter, his vision tunneling. "Dante," Adriana whispered, her voice a thread. "Dante, stop." "We don't stop," he gasped, forcing himself onward. "We never stop." He burst through the door to the lobby. It was not a lobby. It was an inferno. The grand atrium he had walked into just minutes before was now a cavern of fire. The main entrance, their only escape, was 50 yards away, across a landscape of burning debris and collapsed scaffolding, and in the center of it all, standing in the flickering, hellish light, was Salazar Cortez. He was not pristine. He was bleeding from a gash on his head, his suit torn, but he was standing, and he was holding a gun. "I knew." Salazar's voice was a triumphant, insane rasp over the roar of the fire. "I knew you would survive the blasts. Valachi, you are like me, a cockroach." Dante gently, so gently, set Adriana on her feet, holding her up as her legs buckled. He kept his body in front of hers, a human shield. "It's over, Salazar," Dante said, his voice dangerously low. He was out of breath. He was bleeding out, but he was still the boss. "It is," Salazar laughed, a wild, high-pitched sound. "It's over for you. I lost my men. You lost your building. And now you lose her." Salazar raised his gun, his aim steady, pointed not at Dante, but at Adriana. Time stopped. Dante's hand went to the gun at his hip, but he was too slow. His arm was a block of lead. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that he would not make it. Adriana, standing behind him, her mind a fog of pain and smoke, saw it. She saw the gun. She saw the man who had ordered her death, and she saw the man who had refused to let her die. She was not a maid. She was not a victim. Her eyes scanned the debris-strewn floor, a loose pipe, a 3-foot length of steel rebar, dislodged from the concrete. As Salazar's finger tightened on the trigger, Adriana moved. She didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the pipe, her good hand, her strong hand, and lunged. She was a wraith, a fury born of fire. "No!" she screamed, and she swung the pipe with all the strength of her small, scarred body. The pipe connected with Salazar's arm with a wet, heavy crack. His shot went wide, the bullet ricocheting off a steel beam with a sharp zing. Salazar howled, more in surprise than pain, and turned toward her, his gun arm broken, his eyes filled with a murderous rage. It was the chance Dante needed. Dante didn't hesitate. He drew his weapon. He fired once, a single, perfect shot. Salazar's eyes went wide. He looked down at the new, dark hole in the center of his chest. He looked up at Dante. He crumpled. He was dead before he hit the ground. Silence. The only sound was the roar of the fire and the groaning of the dying building. "Adriana?" Dante breathed. He turned. She was on her knees. The pipe dropped from her hand. She was staring at Salazar's body. Then she looked at Dante. You saved me," he said. A sound like thunder, like the end of the world, ripped through the air. The building was coming down. The entire upper tower, all 30 stories, was collapsing in on itself. "Dante!" He scooped her up, his body screaming in protest, and ran. He ran, limping, bleeding, carrying her through the inferno. He lunged, a desperate final push, diving through the shattered glass of the main entrance. They rolled onto the wet pavement outside, just as the entire skyscraper, the Titan Tower, pancaked. A monstrous, deafening roar filled the night as 30 stories of steel and glass collapsed, sending a tidal wave of dust and smoke and ash rolling over the street. Dante never let her go. He lay on the pavement, his body covering hers, the world ending behind them. When the last echo faded, there was silence. Sirens wailed in the distance, a sound from another, saner world. Dante pushed himself up. He was on his knees. He was still holding her. He looked at her face, covered in soot, streaked with tears. He looked at her new burn. I told you," He gasped, his voice a broken whisper, a smile, a real one, touching his lips. "You're not dying tonight." He fell, collapsing sideways onto the pavement, his grip on her finally, and only for a moment, going slack. Adriana woke to the smell of bleach and the steady beep of a heart monitor. Not hers. She was in a small, clean, windowless room. She was in a bed. Her arm was bandaged, her side was stitched, but the fog of pain was gone. She was clean. She sat up. Her body ached, a deep, bone-deep weariness, but she was whole. She was alive. She looked to her left. Dante was in the bed next to hers. He was unconscious, or sleeping. An IV line snaked into his good arm. His chest, beneath a thin white sheet, was bandaged. His shoulder was wrapped. He looked pale. He looked human. She was in an underground clinic, the one Vico had rushed them to, the one the Valachi family used when hospitals were not an option. Adriana swung her legs out of bed. A wave of dizziness hit her, but she pushed it back. She stood, her bare feet hitting the cold tile, and walked the 3 steps to his bedside. She sat in the chair beside him. She reached out her hand, the one that wasn't bandaged, and she touched his. His skin was warm. She sat. Days passed, or she thought they were days. Time in the windowless room was measured in the changing of IV bags and the quiet visits from the sad-eyed doctor who had tended to her in the penthouse. Vico and Franco came and went, their faces grim, their voices low whispers at the door. She healed, and she watched Dante heal. She refused to leave his side. She ate her meals in that chair. She slept in that chair, her head resting on the edge of his bed, her hand on his. She was a silent, unmoving guardian. On the 3rd day, he woke up. His eyes, dark and unfocused, blinked. They scanned the room, the old assessing, predatory gaze. Then they found her. He didn't speak. He just looked at him. She looked back. His hand, the one she wasn't holding, moved. He reached up, his fingers brushing her cheek, a rough, callous touch that was the gentlest thing she had ever known. "Hi," he whispered, his voice a dry croak. "Hi," she whispered back, tears welling in her eyes. On the 5th day, Adriana woke with a start. The chair was cold. The bed beside her was empty. Dante was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, a relic of her old life, seized her. She stood, her heart hammering. Dante? The room was empty. The sheets on his bed were turned back. He was gone. Had he left her? Had it all been a fever dream? Had he, now that the danger was past, discarded her? Was she, once again, just the maid? The liability? She ran to the door, her bare feet slapping the tile. She pulled it open. The clinic was a series of sterile white hallways. "Dante!" she called out, her voice echoing, desperate. She searched, her panic rising, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The clinic, the operating room, a small office. Empty, empty, empty. He had left her. He had survived, and he had left her. She slumped against the wall, a sob, a real one, building in her throat. She had walked through 2 fires. She had faced down a killer. She had stitched a man's wounds, and this was what was going to break her. "I was looking for this." She turned. Dante was standing at the end of the hallway. He was not in a hospital gown. He was dressed. He was wearing dark pants and a clean, soft black t-shirt. He was standing on his own, his arm in a fresh, black sling. He looked whole, and in his good hand, he was holding a small, plastic cup of water in which sat a handful of cheap, wilted daisies, the kind they sold at the all-night bodega on the corner. "There was no vase," he said, his voice still a little rough, but steady. Adriana just stared. The tears she had been holding back, tears of panic, now fell as tears of... she didn't know what. He walked toward her, his limp barely noticeable. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her. His dark eyes, which had held so much violence and pain, now held a new, terrifying, and unfamiliar light. "I went to get the future," he said, his voice soft. He offered her the flowers. She took them, her hands trembling. "I'm not a good man, Adriana," he said, his gaze never leaving hers. "I am. What I am. I've lived in the dark. I've done things you should hate me for. Dante, Don't. No, let me say this. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It was not a diamond. It was not a grand, gaudy Valachi jewel. It was a simple, thin, platinum band, plain, unadorned, strong. He held it out, not on one knee, but standing before her, as an equal. "It's not an order," he said, his voice thick. "It's a promise." He held her gaze. "Say no, and I'll still protect you. I will spend the rest of my life protecting you. I will send you anywhere you want to go. I will give you anything you want. You will always be safe." He took a breath. "Say yes, and I'll never let you burn alone again." Adriana looked at the ring. She looked at the wilted flowers. She looked at his face, his scarred, beautiful, impossible face. She was crying, weeping, not the sobs of a victim, not the tears of a survivor, but the tears of a woman who was, for the first time in her life, truly and completely free. She said yes. She said it not just to him. She said it to herself. He slid the simple band onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. He used his good hand to wipe the tears from her cheeks, his thumb brushing her skin. Then he kissed her. It was a kiss of sunrise, of new beginnings, of promises kept in the fire. The final image was not an ending. It was a beginning. They walked out of the clinic's hidden door, into a back alley. The sun was just rising over Valmont, painting the smog and the steel in hues of pale pink and bright, burning gold. Dante, in his black t-shirt, his arm in a sling. Adriana, in a clean, borrowed set of clothes, her hand in his. Her scars, the new and the old, were visible on her arm. His past, a shadow he would always carry, was behind him. They stood for a moment, two survivors, two lovers, two halves of a whole, forged in violence and flames. Then, hand in hand, they walked out into the sunrise, toward the waiting city. Thank you for listening to this story. I truly appreciate you spending your time with Dante and Adriana. Where are you listening from? I would love to know. Please drop a comment and say hello. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of danger, passion, and survival. And finally, share your thoughts in English. What did you think of their journey? Your feedback means the world.